Hello, junkies. Welcome to Nocturnal Throwback episode number 16, the replay of the podcast I put out way back in 2007 when I would write a chapter a week, edit it, then record it and release it on Sundays. All while I was working a job and doing a bunch of other stuff. This is going to be a short talky talk because there's big news in the land of empty set entertainment. We are moving out of the lair of doom in downtown San Diego. It is a bummer. I won't lie. Our annual lease is up at the end of May 2020. With the COVID situation and with a possible recession coming, we opted not to renew. So we have to be out of there by May 31st. We have been there for 5 years, which means, surprise, there is a lot of stuff. Merch, memorabilia, Sigil artifacts, my music stuff, just general junk you accumulate over the years, and of course, books upon books upon books upon books. We are going from a 2,000 square foot setup to 900 square feet. This is going to require a lot of changes in how we do things. A whole lot. As I said, we're very bummed, but we have done a pretty good job at making some smart choices along the way over the years. The podcast, for one, was a very smart choice that we made. We really doubled down on Audible very early. We did a great job with advertising for a while there. So there's been a few key decisions that we have made and stuck with, even when it didn't seem like the smartest thing to do. That panned out for us. And hopefully this does not pan out for us, because that means there won't be a recession and the United States won't be in a world of poop. But if the United States and the world gets into a world of poop, so I guess the world would get into a galaxy of poop, because you got to upgrade a level, then we're going to look real smart. But we hope that doesn't happen. We hope we come out of this looking real dumb. Then more people would be happy and fewer people would be sad. We think that this shift best sets us up to keep making books, podcasts, audiobooks, etc., even if the poop hits the rotary oscillator. So I ask that you bear with us in the weeks to come, because things might be a little spotty. We'll keep getting the episodes out. We've got that dialed in. But it's, we probably won't have much of a presence on social media. If you follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/Scott Sigler, instagram.com/Scott Sigler. You may see not a whole lot's going on there because we've been very busy. And also on top of the moving, I'm in the process of finishing up GFL Book 6, The Gangster, the final draft at the same time. The pressure is on, folks. We are 84% of the way through The Gangster. We're almost there, ready to get it into production, but not quite yet. And the end game is very tricky. So there's our bad news and or good news, depending on how you want to look at it. And here we go with Nocturnal Throwback episode number 16. Welcome to the free podcast novel Nocturnal, episode number 16. Can you believe that shit?
Nocturnal is a podcast-only novel you can't buy in stores and you can't peek at the end. Written and performed by Scott Sigler. More information and more free stories at scottsigler.com. This book contains adult language, mature situations, and lots of violence.
Hello, my junkies. I hope your weekends went well, and they're probably going better now that you have the world's largest ego to entertain you with yet another story. We are on time yet again for episode 16, which is 30 minutes of story. No news this week, but I will have some promos coming up at the end of the show, including the promo for the book by Amy Mack, who does the Fitness Attack podcast. She's the first podcaster to take her content, make a nonfiction book, and make a run at the Amazon charts like I did with my novel Ancestor. She'll be doing that on the last day of February. Here we go, junkies. Let's get into it.
Hello, Gary Leland here from Podcast Pickle, and I'm here to read the story so far. In the last episode, Rex's strange journey continued as he crossed San Francisco, from rooftop to rooftop, riding on the back of a monster. His new family took him underground at the Broadway Tunnel, where, for the first time, Rex descended into a secret subterranean realm. Despite being warned against pursuing the case, San Francisco homicide detective Bryan Clauser continued to stake out the house of Jebediah Erikson, who Bryan suspects as the murderer of Marco Gastineau. Bryan saw a man in a green cloak kill Gastineau with a bow and arrow, and while staking Erikson's place, saw a cloaked man exit the house. Bryan made his partner Pookie Chang call in a favor and asked for a search warrant at 4 a.m. from Judge Gretchen Rodriguez, with whom Pookie had slept with a few months ago. Pookie made the call and was told to come pick up the warrant. Now, I'm going to turn you over to the man with the plan, Scott Sigler, to get you going on this episode.
Pookie wasn't in the habit of asking for a warrant at 4 a.m., but he'd called anyway. Awkward. And Judge Gretchen Rodriguez hadn't answered the phone. Her husband had. Considering Pookie had taken the wooden boat to Beavertown with the man's wife at a Fraternal Order of Police black tie fundraiser about 5 months ago, even more awkward. Pookie had no way of knowing if Jose Rodriguez knew of the fundraiser party dalliance. Sometimes spouses told each other this stuff, sometimes not. Both of those things were awkward, but they were nothing compared to pulling up to the curb next to the Rodriguez's driveway in the Glen Park neighborhood at 6:30 a.m. and seeing Chief Amy Zoe sitting on the Rodriguez's front steps, coffee in hand. Pookie sighed. This was not good. As soon as he pulled up, Chief Zoe stood and walked to his car. Stalked to his car, more like it. She looked like she was ready to eat boiled detective balls for breakfast. She opened the passenger side door, slid in, and shut it behind her. "Just drive, Chang." He drove. He'd called for an emergency warrant. Murder suspect. Reasonable cause. The judge told him to come pick it up at her house. When he got there, the San Francisco chief of police was waiting for him. The same chief of police who had told him to back off anything related to silver arrows and symbols, both of which they figured they'd find with said search warrant. "Why don't you tell me what you think you're doing?" Zoe said. "I'm here to pick up a warrant," Pookie said. He thought briefly of being coy, acting the smartass, but Zoe wasn't playing. "Bryan has a positive visual ID on Marco Gastineau's killer. He saw the man exit a house on California Street. We need a warrant to go in and search for evidence. I called Judge Rodriguez to obtain that warrant." "Why didn't you call to inform me?" "It was 4 a.m, Chief." "I told you guys to back off this case." Pookie stopped the car, parking in front of a fire hydrant. He turned to face her. "We saw a man killed in cold blood, right in front of us, with a freaking bow and arrow. The guy who did it, he could have hit either one of us. We have a clear trail of evidence that leads to an address, and at that address, Detective Bryan Clauser, San Francisco Police Department, saw a man exit the house, a man that fits the description of Gastineau's killer. A description, Chief, that was filed by none other than the reliable Bryan Clauser himself. We have our man, Chief. All we have to do is go in there and find the arrowheads." "You're not going in there." "Why the fuck not?" Pookie screamed, slapping the steering wheel in frustration. "What are you hiding?" Chief Zoe seemed to retreat, just a bit. Her hand went to the door handle. Not a movement of panic, but a casual, businesslike motion one might use to pick up a pencil. She never took her eyes off Pookie. Pookie took a deep breath. Chief Zoe wasn't afraid, but she also wasn't stupid. He outweighed her by 70 pounds, and was 15 years her junior. In the close confines of a car, Pookie could easily overpower her. While that would never happen, she had 30 years of cop training and cop experience. Cops prepared for anything. She was probably ready to punch at his throat, nose, or eyes as she simultaneously slid out of the car. He couldn't stop glaring at her. She was on the take. She stared right back at him, that same glare she used in her office. Chief Zoe didn't take shit from anybody. "Who do you think you're talking to, detective?" Pookie forced himself to look away. "You gotta tell me what's going on, Chief. This looks bad. Real bad." "I don't have to tell you anything, detective. I'm the chief of police of San Francisco. I'm your boss. You get that?" Pookie nodded. "Uh-huh. You just tell me how you can look your twin daughters in the eye when you kiss them goodnight. How you can live with yourself, knowing there is a vigilante killer out there, above the law, murdering people who deserve their due process." Chief Zoe sighed. "Look, there are some things I just can't tell you. I've been on the force for 30 years. I'm asking you to trust me.
There's a lot more going on here than you know. If you won't trust me, Chief, how can you expect me to trust you? Zoe paused. She clearly wanted to talk, but she held herself back. I'll give you one thing, she said finally. I'll give you this one thing. Then you never speak of it again. You know about Erikson, don't you? Pookie shrugged. And you know what happened to him in mid-1974? Pookie started to shrug again, then paused. Yeah, we know. Committed. Zoe nodded slowly. Then look something up for me. Look up the murder rate in San Francisco in 1975. Pookie waited, but she didn't continue. That's it? Zoe glared at him. That's all you need to know. Wow, that's the one thing you give us? Holy cow, Chief, it's like Christmas and my fucking birthday all rolled up into one swinging good time. You're done with this case, Detective, Zoe said, her tone sliding into the cold control of command. You're off. No more investigation of Panos, Gastineau, Solar, Erikson, Arrowhead symbols, all of that shit. You leave it alone, or you'll be driving a golf cart and passing out parking tickets. I like you. I think you're a good cop, but I will not have you ignore my orders again. Now, since you act like one of my twin daughters who pretend not to hear me, I'm going to do to you what I do to them. Repeat it back to me. I got it. Repeat it back to me, Detective. Pookie leaned back and stared up at the night sky. I'm off the case. I'll ignore the brutal murder of two 16-year-old boys and the disappearance of two more, the murder of a 13-year-old boy and the disappearance of his father, mother, and sister, the cold-blooded assassination of a murder witness in front of two police, the murder of a high school principal, the disappearance of a geography teacher, and I'll ignore the fact that we know the people who are probably responsible for all of it. Did I repeat that back to you well enough, Chief? Now it was Chief Zoe's turn to look away. The stone gaze faded from her eyes, just for a moment. In that moment, she wasn't the hard chief of police. She was a 45-year-old woman with two daughters. Yeah, you got it right. Don't cross me, Chang. There's more here than you'll ever know. She slid out of the car. Pookie hit the gas as soon as the car door shut, squealing away from the curb. Dawn broke over the horizon. Buildings cast long shadows that stretched for blocks across the wide streets. Bryan wanted the cover of darkness to enter Erikson's house, and a full complement of SWAT commandos armed to the gills. The sun meant he'd lose that cover, lose the night in which he felt so at home. But he had to get in there. Answers were in that house. His cell phone rang. Pookie, calling with the warrant. Wouldn't be long now. Pooks, tell me you got it. I would have, but guess which high-ranking police official was waiting for me at Judge Rodriguez's house? Bryan's heart sank. What happened? She ordered us off the case. All of it, man. Panos, Gastineau, Erikson, the whole fucking thing. You're kidding me. We have a goddamn murderer here. Preaching to the choir, son. She said we go near it in any way and we're done. We have to walk away. So get out of there. Bryan shook his head. This couldn't be happening. I have to go in. No, you don't. Bryan, trust me. She's not fucking around. There's no more ambiguity in her words. She called us off all of it. You go in. Your career is over. This man is above the law. Remember when you told me it might get ugly, that we might not get to sit at the cool kids' lunch table? There was a brief pause. Bryan could hear Pookie breathing, focusing. Look, man, just wait till I get there, okay? Just wait. Use your head. Even if you go against Zoe, you're going into a killer's house, alone. That's just fucking stupid. Pookie wasn't trying to talk him out of it anymore. Bryan was going in, and Pookie was going in with him. It might mean the end of their careers, and possibly jail time, depending on just how far Zoe wanted to push it. Of course, depending on how corrupt Zoe had really become, it could mean a lot worse than being suspended, fired, or even jailed. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Pookie said, then hung up. Bryan put the phone away. He waited. He watched. They walked through rough tunnels made of dirt, rocks, and half-rotted timbers. The timbers formed steeped, inverted V's that supported large chunks of clumped, dirty rocks. The whole thing looked horribly fragile and delicate, as if it might collapse at any moment. "This doesn't look very safe," Rex said. He didn't need to ride Pierre anymore, nor could he. Pierre had to duck to get through the tunnels. The big creature looked up frequently, constantly checking his head height. He seemed quite wary of bumping the timbers above them.
"Don't worry, my king,"
Sly said.
"The tunnels are designed to collapse easily if we set fire to the timbers, but we would not let anything happen to you. Everyone faces cave-ins at one point or another."
Does anyone die from the cave-ins?"
"Sometimes they do. That's what we face, being forced to live underground, forced to live like animals."
Rex had spent his whole life in San Francisco, surrounded by varying levels of noise. Even at night, the sound of cars filtered into his house. But down here, he experienced true silence for the first time. He found it both disturbing and comforting. He lost track of how long they walked. The narrow tunnel made for slow going, especially considering the size of Pierre and Fort. Servo seemed to compress on Fort's shoulders, flatten somehow, to take up less space. At times, Rex had to stoop over and walk in a crouch, which meant Pierre, Fort, even Sly had to crawl through the dirt. It probably explained why their clothes were so tattered and filthy. It was no way for his family to live. Finally, the narrow tunnel opened up into a shallow cavern, maybe 15 feet high at the most. The whole thing not quite as wide as a city block. Dim light filled the cavern, cast off by assorted light fixtures and naked bulbs that were fixed to any number of things. Chunks of dirty concrete, old logs, a rusted-out streetcar straight out of a gangster flick. And in the middle of the cavern, lights of all shapes and sizes affixed to it, sat a pair of wooden ships. Big ones, like Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria-sized ones. One listed to the left, her black old hull cracked and broken in 100 places. On the back of the ship, Rex saw chewed-up wooden letters that spelled out the name Almandrolina. The ship had no masts, and the curved hull ran up the cavern's high ceiling. To the right of that ship sat the second. This one rolled all the way over on its right side. The hull looked barely intact, as if some giant had picked up the whole ship, lifted it up 100 feet in the air, and then dropped it. This one also had no masts, but because it was on its side, Rex could see the upper deck, which sloped up to the cavern ceiling at a 45-degree angle. He could make out a few letters on the back of this one, an R, then a space, then an AR, space, O. People walked in and out of the ships, and he could see them inside the ships, through cracks in the hull and holes cut into the wood. Well, not all of them looked like people. Some of them looked like monsters. The people, the monsters, they saw him. They stopped what they were doing. Some stared at him. Some started slowly walking towards him. Hundreds of them. His chest filled with light and heat, so intense, so pure and clear, his eyes briefly rolled up and his head tilted back. Rex's knees wobbled, and he would have fallen if Sly hadn't reached out a thick arm to hold him up. "Sly, what is this place?"
"This is home. Welcome home, my king."
Tard tried to put it all together, but it was hard. Making his skin look like brick always made him itchy, especially the red brick, but he didn't know why. But he dare not scratch, dare not even move, because the monster was out of his house. Tard's job was to be terrified every night. Every night he watched the monster come out of the house and disappear somewhere out on the streets. You never knew where he was. He could be right behind you. Every second, Tard didn't know for sure. The only time he could breathe easy was for about 5 minutes when the monster came back to the house. But then the feeling slipped away, as Tard wondered if the monster might have slipped out the front door or a side window, circled around the block, scaled a building, and... He forced the thoughts away. Focus. This was an important job. Sly had told him so. Important and tricky, like James Bond. That's what Tard wanted to be, like James Bond, all smooth and stuff. And that name, James Bond, that was cool. Better than Tard. Tard wanted to be called Chameleon, but when he asked people to call him that, they just laughed at him. But they wouldn't always laugh. Sly had said so. Sly had said only the bravest of Marie's children could watch the monster, and Tard wanted to be brave, wanted everyone to like him. Tard had asked why they didn't kill the monster if they knew where he was. Sly said because the monster killed everyone who went near the house. Many had tried. Many brothers and sisters had tried. None of them ever came back. So watching the house, well, that was just dang dangerous. But if you could do it, if you could watch, Sly said, then everyone would know you were brave and everyone would like you. Sly was just so, he was just so cool. Everyone liked Sly, except Firstborn, who said Sly was dangerous to the nest. Firstborn had said that to Tricky Dick, and Tard wasn't supposed to hear it, but Tard had made his skin perfectly match a rotted timber in a tunnel, and Firstborn hadn't even known he was there. Firstborn couldn't even smell Tard, and Firstborn could smell everything. Masking your scent, now that was something none of them could do. Not Sly, not Pierre, not Fort, not Servo, not Tricky Dick, not Sucka, not even Firstborn himself. Listening in on Firstborn was also dang dangerous, but Sly had dared him to do it. Only Tard could hide like that. Maybe he wasn't the smartest, but only Tard could change his skin. Only Tard could sit motionless for 8 hours, barely breathing. This one time, the monster had landed on the same roof. The same roof. He had been only 10 feet from Tard, who at the time matched the color and texture of roof tar. Had Tard moved, even twitched, it would have been his ass. If Tard had been brave, he could have tried to kill the monster. But Sly had said to never, ever try it. Sly usually smiled when he talked, but he didn't smile when he said that. Sly had even told him to never, ever draw the protection symbols, because the monster would see them, and he would figure out where Tard was. Tard had his job, only he couldn't tell anyone about his job, because Firstborn said that no one was to ever go near the monster's house. Sly had said it was okay, though, to not tell anyone, to ignore Firstborn's orders. Tard wasn't sure about ignoring Firstborn's orders, but Sly knew best. So here he was, trying to figure it all out. There was someone else watching the house, had been for a few nights. A human. The human was on a 6-story building to the west of the monster's house, while Tard enjoyed his 10-story rooftop perch due south of the place. Tard looked down on the man. The man was good, a good hunter, Tard could tell, because the man barely moved. Who was this man? What did he want with the monster? Was he working for the monster? Tard didn't know. Maybe if he kept watching, he'd figure it out. Then he could tell Sly, and Sly would see that Tard really wasn't stupid, would start calling him Chameleon, and they could go out hunting together. That would be cool. He blinked slowly. He always forgot that when he made himself look like brick, his eyelids clinked when he blinked, unless he blinked in kind of a slow motion. Tard watched the man watching the house, wondering if something might happen. People didn't call John Smith at 6:45 a.m. Just didn't happen. Still, he was a cop, and when the phone rang, he answered instead of ignoring it.
Yeah, what is it?
Black Mr. Burns. Are you busy?
No. Just, sleeping. It's dark out.
The ninja needs us.
John sat up, now wide awake.
Anything he needs, Pooks.
Are you sure? This is bad juju, BMB. Black ops, if you'll pardon the implied racist pun in that phrase.
Stop wasting my time, Pookie. You knew I'd say yes before you even called me.
True that. You need to be at 1971 California Street in 15 minutes flat. Stay 5 houses away. Don't approach until I call you. Gun? Yes. Badge? No. You got it?
Gun and no badge. Pookie wasn't kidding. This was some bad juju. But it didn't matter. John Smith, Black Mr. Burns, wouldn't even be alive if it wasn't for the ninja. "I'm there, Pooks." John hung up and scrambled for his clothes. With the dawn breaking, surface streets would be filled with early morning traffic. He'd have to take his Harley to make it on time. Tonda Murphy sat in the cruiser's passenger seat, munching away on a chocolate-covered donut. The kind with peanuts on top. Sure, she was an overweight cop eating a donut and drinking coffee, stereotypical as hell. And she didn't give a warty rat stick about it. She was fat, so what? She didn't care. Wei Chi Yen, who was driving, didn't seem to care either, especially when they were fucking. Chi turned the cruiser north onto Van Ness, coming off of Golden Gate. That took them out of the Tenderloin, one of the worst parts in San Fran next to Hunters Point, which was basically a mutated extension of that shithole known as Oakland as far as Tonda was concerned. She worried about Chi, more than just as her partner. She was starting to fall for the little fire plug, which was bad considering his second divorce had yet to be finalized. When that was in the bag, and not a moment before, she'd find out if Chi felt the same way about her. Those other women, they didn't understand him, and how could they? They didn't walk the line. They didn't carry a gun. Wei Chi Yen was fucked up and violent, that was for sure, but sometimes that's what you needed to do the job. Sometimes he pushed the edge, roughed people up a bit too much maybe. But he carried the shield, which really meant he carried a bullseye painted over his heart. Regular people didn't understand that, never really could understand that. But Tonda lived it every day. If anyone was put on this earth to truly love and understand Wei Chi Yen, it was Big Tonda Murphy. She polished off the donut and looked in the box. What had been a baker's dozen 3 hours ago was now down to one last chocolate covered with peanuts. "You want the last one?" she asked Chi. He snuck a peek into the box and smiled when he saw the last donuts race. "Hells no. That one's got your name written all over it." "Yeah, well, I might have had more than my fair share." "Oh, bull. You're too skinny, Tonda. Eat up." She smiled and took the donut, marveling at how God had rewarded her for a life of devotion. An overweight, black woman cop, and the Lord above had put her in a car for 8 hours a day with a fatty chaser. She liked him big, and at 6'2" and 250 pounds, Tonda Murphy didn't disappoint. Her cell phone buzzed. She pulled it out and looked at the text message on the screen. It said, "Find a reason to be at Pine and Octavia in exactly 10 minutes. Ninja business." "Gee, baby, head to Pine and Octavia, like right now." "Sure thing. Why?" "Pookie just texted. Something's up with Clauser." She nodded 3 times. He kept heading north on Van Ness, then turned west on Pine. "That takes us out of our area. Better call something in." Tonda picked up the radio handset. "Dispatch, this car Adam 12 over."
Adam 12, this is dispatch. Go ahead.
"We have an erratic driver heading westbound on Van Ness, trailing him to see what might happen."
Roger that, Adam 12.
"Drive slow, Chi," Tonda said, looking at her watch. "We need to be there in 8 minutes, no sooner." He wore a black ski mask, but he was done sneaking. Part of Bryan Clauser felt bad for what he was about to do, but it was a small part compared to the giant parts of him that wanted answers. Gun in hand, he walked up the 3 wide stone steps to Erikson's front door. The huge, Gothic, gray Victorian seemed to be waiting for him. Without breaking stride, he raised his left foot and kicked just below the door handle. The wood cracked with a gunshot sound, frayed white splinters following 2 halves of the door into the hallway beyond. The door had looked a lot more solid than that. Must have been some cheap pine and not the old oak Bryan had thought it upon first glance. A clanging metal sound joined the skittering noises of splinters playing across the foyer's polished marble floor. Then, the shrill tone of an alarm. Bryan Clauser's chin dipped down. He stared forward from a half-lowered head and walked inside the house. The break-in had tripped a magnetic sensor, which sent a signal down a thin wire to the basement, to the small alarm control box. That had, of course, triggered the klaxon that screeched through the house, but the system wasn't finished. A telephone wire ran out of the control box into an 80s-style multi-line office phone, the kind that had once been white but had yellowed with well over 2 decades of age. The phone had a handset, next to which ran a vertical line of 8 buttons, each with a red light. The red light next to line 1 lit up. The phone's speaker let out a brief dial tone, then 7 rapid digital beeps. Pookie Chang and Black Mr. Burns approached the door to 1971 California Street. Pookie nodded as he pulled on a black ski mask.
Give it 4 minutes, then call it in, Black Burns.
Black Mr. Burns nodded. Yeah, got it covered. Did you see him hit that door? Damn thing there exploded.
Must be made of pine.
Man, Ninja's all worked up. I hope he finds what he's looking for. Pookie nodded.
You and me both, brother.
Pookie pulled his weapon, checked that the safety was off, and pointed it to the ground. Gun in one hand, mag light in the other, he jogged up to the house. The alarm blared its shrill, repeating warning. The front door was fucked up and how. Bryan had really done a number on it. Pookie knelt and looked at one half of the ornate, fallen door. It wasn't pine. It was oak. Almost 2 inches of solid oak, strong as hell. A pair of deadbolts winked in the moving mag light beam. Then Pookie saw something else. A 3-foot-long steel beam, the kind used to bar a door, bent at one end. Bryan had ripped through a super thick door, 2 big deadbolts, and a fucking steel bar.
Chuck Norris got nothing on you,
Pookie whispered. The ninja was one bad motherfucker. 10 feet inside the door, Pookie caught up with Bryan. Their mag light beams played off the walls of a house that simply reeked of old money, turn-of-the-century money. Back in the days of the lumber barons, the gold barons, the whatever barons, back in the days when men like that built places like this for their wives and daughters to impress the city, or simply to let everyone know just how rich they were. The 19th century equivalent of a Humvee. Polished redwood paneling covered every inch of the walls and ceiling. It was ornately carved and glowed with a high gloss over the dark brown wood. The floors, marble with thick veins of granite and thin streaks of gold. Every door handle was gleaming brass. Every light was a chandelier. There was even a small fire crackling away in a fireplace that looked straight out of an old Vincent Price flick, filling an ornate living room with dancing light. In short, this was the kind of Victorian mansion that anywhere but San Francisco had already been turned into a bed and breakfast.
Bryan, you okay?
Pookie asked. He had to talk loud to be heard over the alarm.
Fine,
Bryan said without bothering to turn around.
So we're in here. Where do you want to start?
Bryan said nothing. His beam kept playing around the room, down the halls, off of old ornately framed pictures that showed Victorian-era men with bushy mustaches and serious expressions.
Bryan, man, we don't have a lot of time.
Bryan turned suddenly, staring straight at Pookie. Bryan's eyes filled with a combination of rage and pure terror.
Pooks, I'm hunting. Do me a favor and shut your fucking mouth.
Bryan turned again. The beam punched holes in the house's shadows, then stopped, stone still, on a black door.
That's it,
Bryan whispered.
Oh my God, Pooks, I've seen this door before.
The sound in Bryan's voice, a hoarse sound, a sound of fear, maybe even pure terror. The sound of that voice made Pookie think that Bryan might just turn and run. Instead, the ninja strode forward and yanked the door open. Old stairs led into a shadowy basement lined with dark gray stone. Bryan hesitated only a second, then descended. Pookie followed. And now I've got those promos I promised you. The first one is from Amy Mack, who is the host of The Fitness Attack. She's a podcaster, a vidcaster, and now an author. She's taken her first 100 exercise tips, put them all together in one book, and she's making a run at the Amazon charts. You may have heard of her if you've heard the phrase, "exercise." The second promo is for the Under Development podcast. This is hosted by Brent Weichel, who is an old-time junkie. He's a filmmaking student in college, and he's doing a vidcast/podcast to track his development as a director. Basically, he's doing an ad hoc podcast and vidcast to track his education and development as a filmmaker. If he winds up being one of those people who makes it in Hollywood, it sure will be interesting to look back on his career at these early formative stages. And the final promo is for Silverwolf, who has a podcast to talk about games, movies, and just every darn opinion that he can think of.
All right, everybody, it's here. That's right, it's here. Fitness Attack, the book, a compilation from the first 100 shows, is going up for sale on February 29th. That's right, Leap Day. It'll be $15 and available through the Amazon link on withamymac.com. We're asking everyone to purchase on this day to boost the book's ranking. As always, thank you for your amazing support.
All I want to do is just get into bed and go to sleep. My name is Bryan Weichel, and follow me through my journeys, trying to eat, make it to class on time, and maybe have a life. Visit me at www.theunderdevelopmentpodcast.com.
Hey, do you want a podcast with honest opinions on video games, movies, and almost everything else? Then check out the Silverwolf Audioblog Podcast, or SWABP for short. I provide all this, plus so much more every other week online. Check out the podcast and subscribe at swabp.blogspot.com. See you there, pack members.
You have been listening to Nocturnal, written and performed by Scott Sigler. For more information, go to scottsigler.com. All music in this podcast provided by Uncrowned off their album Devils and Angels, available now at the iTunes Music Store.
Is it